God bless the red, white, and blue. But the truth be told, we're a blue nation. We're a bummed out nation. There's lots and lots of depression in the United States of America today. Let me give you an idea of just how much. The lifetime prevalence rate of major depressive disorder is 16.2%. That means between 32 and 35 million people will have an episode of major depressive disorder at some point in their lifetime. The 12-month prevalence rate is 7%, and that means that 14 million people will have an episode of major depressive disorder within any given year. If you add to that all of the disorders that feature depressive states but don't qualify as major depressive disorders, such as dysthymic disorder or bipolar, you have one slew of sad people. I want to talk to you about what major depressive disorder is, what are some of the features of this disorder, and this is from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-4, and I'm going to be kind of paraphrasing what they say about depression. But listen to this and see if it sounds like you or someone you know. Depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Lack of interest or pleasure in most activities. Losing weight or gaining weight. Depression is a disorder of extremes. Not sleeping or sleeping too much, insomnia or hypersomnia. The thoughts and physical movements are either very fast or very slow, which is called psychomotor agitation or psychomotor retardation. Tiredness, a lack of energy. Feelings of worthlessness or extreme guilt. Difficulty in focusing and making decisions. Thinking about death or thoughts of suicide. If that sounds like you or someone you know, then get help for that individual, because the good news is that major depressive disorder is very treatable. Now, there are two basic forms of treatment that we use in the mental health field today. One of them is antidepressant therapy, and of course you've heard of that. Antidepressant therapy simply raises the number of neurotransmitters that are circulating in the bloodstream, and the neurotransmitters that raise the mood level. So they can often be very helpful. The other form of therapy is called talk therapy. Now, often if there's a very severe case of depression, both will be used. But in some cases, only talk therapy is used. Talk therapy is simply seeing a counselor or a social worker or a psychiatrist and talking out your problem. And that's what I do. I'm a talk therapist. When I want to sound really intimidating, I call myself a psychotherapist because it sounds a little bit scary. But basically, what a talk therapist does is they invite a person into their office, that individual shares their problems, what they're experiencing, and the talk therapist helps them talk through it and works with them to find a solution for the problem for a fee, because psychology, like so many other things, is a business. One of the primary modalities of talk therapy that is used for depression is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy has very strong support in the scientific literature for its effectiveness for depression. Now, the reason it's so effective is because it's based on a timeless principle found in the Bible. And that principle is spoken in the Proverbs in this way. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. That principle is that the way we think determines just kind of how we are, how we feel, and how we behave. It kind of determines character in many respects. Cognitive behavioral therapy rests on a very simple premise, and that is this: that there are negative life events. And then as a result of negative life events, we have negative emotions. Now, one would assume that there is a direct line from the negative life events to the negative emotions, but not so, says cognitive behavioral therapy. It says mediating between the negative life events and the negative emotions is something called cognitive processing, the way we think about an event, the way we frame that event, how we evaluate that event, how we regard that event. That determines ultimately how we feel over the long term. So the point of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as we call it, is to help people identify where their thinking has gone awry. Because what we find with depressed people is they tend to cast things in a very negative light. They tend to walk on the dark side of the road. And so they will frame things, they will think about things in very negative terms that are often a distortion of reality. They're too negative. Now, there's another extreme, and that is the Pollyanna syndrome, which isn't a diagnosis, but we all know what that is, where someone is too positive, so much so that they don't seem to be testing reality. They don't seem to have their feet on the ground. But depressed people tend to be on the other end of the spectrum. They just tend to look at the dark side of everything. So what we do when we're dealing with a person, when we're using cognitive behavioral therapy for an individual who is depressed, is we help them reframe their thoughts. So let me give you a concrete example. Someone goes through a terrible divorce. Their husband runs off with another woman. And they come into the office and they say, "I'm unlovable." What a cognitive behavioral therapist will do is help them reframe that. Is it really the case that you're unlovable? Or did he have a problem? Was he unfaithful? And even if you had some flaws and some problems in that marriage, you can correct those things and you can become an even more lovable person. And so that individual will learn to talk in a more balanced way about their situation and not discount the positive and say in the end, you know, I can be lovable and I will find someone who loves me and I will love again. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy does. You know, as I said before, the reason it works is because it's founded on timeless principles. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 12 verse 2 that we should be transformed by the renewing of our mind. You know, it's very, very difficult to keep those negative events from coming. We can't really stop negative life events, can we? I've written to the IRS and I've said, please don't make me pay taxes anymore, and they keep making me pay taxes. Every year it rolls around in April that I have to pay those taxes again. Can't keep those negative life events from occurring. It's also very difficult to change our emotions. I don't know if you've ever tried, but it's kind of like trying to grab water. You know, emotions are pretty elusive. We can, however, change our thoughts by the grace of God, just as Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says. We can be transformed by the renewing of our mind.